Multiple devices එකවර connect කළ හැකි internet like a boss. SLT Mobitel Fiber. Multiple devices එකවර connect කළ හැකි internet like a boss. SLT Mobitel Fiber.
Tonight, stay at home. The Ministry of Education has decided to close down schools for 1 week from Monday due to the fuel shortages. Warning signs. The Bar Association warns of dire consequences of public mistrust in the government and law enforcement following police attacks at fuel queues. Cutting down. National hospital surgeons curtail cardiac operations due to medicine shortages and fuel issuance problems. Wrong targets. Police target 9 Gota Gogama activists for arrest, citing unruly behavior during the 9th of May unrest. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Saturday, the 18th of June, 2022.
නැවුම් සුවඳින් පිරේ නවරින් වෙළඳපොලේ අඩුම මිලකට
සුවඳවත් තේරීමක් ස්මාර්ට් ඉදිරියක්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, you're watching First at 9 with me, David Ebert. Now, tensions have been high over the past few days at many refilling stations, with members of the public continuing to spend hours and in some instances, even days on end waiting for fuel. Meanwhile, given the fuel shortage, the Ministry of Education announced that all government and government-approved schools will be closed for 1 week, starting from Monday the 20th of June.
For over 4 months, people have spent large parts of their days and even nights in fuel and gas queues. This daily task, which has continuously deprived the people of their time for better use, has led to increased levels of frustration among the public. This has in turn been the reason for many instances where increased tensions at refilling stations have been recorded. One such incident was reported at the Aravala Sipetco refilling station in Piliyandala. Tensions were high at the refilling station after pump attendants had allegedly issued fuel beyond the government-mandated quantities for some vehicles. Even though a group of army personnel had been deployed to the location to calm the people, they were unable to do so until a second group of army personnel were deployed to the area. In addition, some of the vehicles that had been parked for days at queues at some refilling stations are now having to face mechanical issues. Bus and truck drivers at the fuel queue in Badula said that even though efforts were taken to restart their vehicles, they were unsuccessful. Compounding the already existing shortage of fuel in the country is the limited distribution of fuel that is available. The Sri Lanka Petroleum Private Tanker Owners Association says that only 30% of their tankers' capacity are in use at the moment, and that the lack of priority has affected the distribution process.
ටැංකි රථ ධාවනය කිරීමට අවශ්‍ය කරන ඉන්ධන ලබා දීමක් සිදු වෙනවා කොළොන්නාවේ සහ සීලම තොග ගබඩා වලින්. එය ලබා ගැනීමට ටැංකි රථ වලට පැය 4ක 5ක කාලයක් ගත කරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා. ඒ හේතුව තුළ ඉන්ධන පිරවුම් වල වෙද අවශ්‍ය තොග ලැබීමේදී සෑහෙන කාලයක් ගත වෙනවා. ඒ ආයතනය තුළ සේවය කරන මහතුරුන්ට ප්‍රමුඛතාවය දීම තුළ තමයි ඉන්ධන ටැංකි රථ වලට ප්‍රමුඛතාවයක් නොමැති හේතුවෙන් තමයි මෙම ප්‍රමාදය සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ.
In the meantime, in response to the shortage of fuel and in the hopes of alleviating the frustrations from the people spending the little fuel available to finding refilling stations, a website showing fuel availability at stations was introduced last week. However, the website fuel.gov.lk, introduced last week by the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and the Information and Communication Technology Agency, is currently inactive. The notice on the site informs visitors that it is temporarily offline and that the public will be notified once operations resume. In other developments, the Ministry of Education announced today that all government and government-approved private schools within the Colombo city limits will be closed for 1 week, starting from Monday the 20th. The ministry said that the decision was taken due to the issues in transportation. However, all rural schools which do not face such challenges are allowed to continue school activities at the discretion of their respective principals. In the meantime, in a backdrop where multiple issues have arisen due to the shortage of fuel, some people, including officials, seem to be exploiting the situation. A video circulating on social media showed how a police officer in the act of allegedly accepting cash for fuel.
මොකද්ද ඔයා කරන්නේ? මේ මහත්තයෝ. ඔයා මේ කැත වැඩ කරන්න එපා. හයි. ඔයා සල්ලි ගත්තේ මොනවද? ඔයා සල්ලි ගත්තේ මොනවද? නෑ අපේ නංගිගේ. නෑ කාගෙන්වත් ඔයාලා සල්ලි ගන්න නෑ. ඔයා කෑල්ල එකට පෙට්‍රල් ගහලා එහෙම ගන්නේ කොහොමද?
Meanwhile, another video on social media showed fuel being dispensed into plastic vessels directly from an IOC fuel bowser that was stopped on Marine Drive. In light of this development, taking to Twitter, the Lanka IOC expressed deep anguish over the indulgence of the subject tanker transport crew in wrongful and unethical activity and said that strict action in line with the prevalent guidelines has been initialized against the concerned transporter. Meanwhile, taking to Twitter, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara said that the licenses of 3 fuel trucks have been suspended immediately by the CPETCO and LIOC pending further investigations into the 3 incidents reported on social media on fuel transport trucks illegally unloading fuel.
Meanwhile, the Bar Association of Sri Lanka issued a statement today calling on law enforcement authorities to act with empathy and understanding when dealing with the public frustrated by the economic crisis. The statement was issued by the BASL following instances where the police and members of the public clashed in Athuragiriya and Kurunegala yesterday. 7 suspects believed to be involved in the clash in Athuragiriya were remanded by the police until Monday the 20th of June, where they are to be produced before an identification parade.
Incidents of tensions erupting between the police and the public waiting in long queues for fuel were recorded yesterday. One such incident had erupted at an IOC refilling station yesterday in Athuragiriya, when the police had started beating up people protesting in front of the refilling station, demanding fuel after dispensing ended at around 9 p.m. Following the clash, 6 police officers had been admitted to the Homagama Base Hospital. The police stated that they had arrested 9 suspects in connection with the clashes that took place in Athuragiriya, and they were produced before the Kaduwela Magistrates Court earlier today. Following the court proceedings, a woman and her husband who were among the 9 suspects were ordered to be released, while the remaining 7 suspects were remanded until Monday the 20th of June in order to be produced before an identification parade. Eyewitnesses to the incident said that more police officers had arrived to the area after an individual who was not part of the fuel queue had provoked the police officers by yelling at them. However, the bystanders also said that the fight was instigated by the police.
පොලිස් නිලධාරීන් මෙම ස්ථානයේ රාජකාරී යොදවන්නේ ඉඳන හලෙත් ඒ වගේ ඔබගේ ආරක්ෂාවට එම නිසා ඔවුන් සමග ගැටුම් ඇති කරගන්නට එපා. අපි විශේෂයෙන් මහ ජනතාවගෙන් ඉල්ලා සිටිනවා මොකද ඔබ යම්කිසි ආර්ථික සමාජීය අපහසුතාවයකට පත් වෙලා තිබෙනවා නම් පොලිස් නිලධාරියාත් ඒ ආකාරයෙන්ම මේ තත්ත්වයට මුහුණ දෙමින් තමයි ඔබත් එක්ක රාජකාරී කරන්නේ. පොලිස් නිලධාරීන් සමග ගැටුමක් ඇති කරගෙන යම්කිසි ආකාරයක බාධා සිදු කරලා පහර දීම් සිදු කරොත් ඔබට එරෙහිව නීතිය ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්නට සිද්ධ වෙනවා. අකමැත්තෙන් වුවත්.
In the meantime, another tense situation was reported this time in Maspota Kurunegala, where a senior police officer was seen assaulting an individual while having his service weapon drawn. The incident had reportedly taken place after the victim had protested against the refilling station, suspending fuel dispensing when he was hoping to get fuel to visit his newborn child in hospital. In this backdrop, the Bar Association of Sri Lanka issued a statement today calling for law enforcement to act with empathy and restraint when dealing with the people. The BSL says that while it is understandable that the police and armed forces are affected by the crisis too and its pressures, it said that law enforcement officers must in all instances act with fairness and impartiality, as any acts as being biased and unfair will add to the distrust which already exists. Further, it calls on the government to take urgent and practical steps to ease the public burden and ensure that the needs of the public are met. The BSL reiterated that reassuring the people and creating public confidence are important steps in addressing the crisis.
Meanwhile, surgeons at the National Hospital in Colombo have written to the hospital's administrators, informing them of surgeries being curtailed due to the lack of medicines and of difficulties in obtaining fuel despite assurances for priority for health professionals. Due to this, surgeons and anesthetists have decided to restrict cardiothoracic operations and operate only 2 theatres, with each surgeon operating 2 theatre lists per week. Further, the number of junior medical officers, nurses, technical staff and junior staff will be cut down as well. Cardiac surgeons and cardiac anesthesiologists at the National Hospital in Colombo have decided to curtail several cardiothoracic operations from Monday due to the shortage of drugs, other medical consumables and the shortage of fuel for them to travel to work. In a letter written to the Deputy Director General of the National Hospital, Dr. W.K. Vikramasinghe, on Thursday, a group of cardiac surgeons and cardiac anesthetists have claimed that fuel stations have refused to give priority to doctors and healthcare staff due to public outcries at the locations. Accordingly, the letter informs the hospital administrator that due to these issues, cardiothoracic operations will be restricted as they have been forced to spend 6 to 10 hours in fuel queues. The letter says that from Monday, only 2 theatres will be in operation, with each surgeon operating 2 theatre lists per week. Further, the number of junior medical officers, nurses, technical staff and junior staff will be reduced as well. They have also informed the hospital that only the most critical and urgent cases will be performed under these circumstances. Meanwhile, the All Ceylon Nurses Union warns that patients are now facing malnutrition at hospitals and the situation is increasingly becoming critical. The union adds that with hospital food having been curtailed, patients from rural areas are forced to bear the brunt of this, with them having to purchase food from outside. What food is provided to patients includes just rice and dal, with no protein in the form of eggs or meat. Further, the union has also warned that due to a shortage of local anesthetics, some surgical procedures are now being carried out under general anesthesia. Now, Transparency International Sri Lanka has filed a petition in the Supreme Court demanding accountability for the economic crisis. The petition has listed 13 respondents, including the President, the former Premier, ex-Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral, former Treasury Secretary S.R. Atigala and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. The petition also accuses the respondents of bearing direct responsibility for the unsustainability of Sri Lanka's foreign debt, its hard default on foreign loan repayments, and the current state of the economy. A fundamental rights petition has been filed in the Supreme Court by Transparency International Sri Lanka and 3 private individuals, calling for action against persons responsible for the current economic crisis in Sri Lanka. The Attorney General representing President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, former Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa, former Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral, former Treasury Secretary S.R. Atigala, and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe are among 13 respondents named in the petition. Transparency International says that the petition was filed in the public interest, considering the lack of accountability and transparency in high-level decision-making that has brought the country to its knees. The petition lists a number of factors that have led to the current economic crisis. These include the reduction in government revenue caused by the illegal and arbitrary tax breaks granted in 2019, the failure to reverse the illegal tax breaks introduced by the government since then, the failure to take remedial measures subsequent to rating downgrades, the failure to devalue the Sri Lankan rupee in a timely, orderly and appropriate manner despite widespread calls to do so, the decision to continue servicing sovereign debt without any restructuring, and the refusal to seek the assistance of the IMF until the crisis had exacerbated to uncontrollable levels. The petitioners argue that the fundamental rights of the citizens to equality, freedom of expression and the right to information guaranteed under the Constitution have been violated through the actions or inaction of the respondents, among other rights. The petition also claims that the respondents named in the petition are directly responsible for the unsustainability of Sri Lanka's foreign debt, its hard default on foreign loan repayments, and the current state of the economy in the country. It adds that the actions and inaction of the respondents has led to the current shortages of food, medicine, fuel and gas in the country, victimizing the entire population in an unprecedented manner. The petition calls for the respondents to be held accountable for their illegal, arbitrary and unreasonable acts or omissions which culminated in the current economic crisis. The co-petitioners are Chandra Jayaratna, Jehan Kanagaratna and Julian Bowling. And with that, we'll be back with more stories right after this short break. Do stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. The police have named 9 activists involved in the Gota Gowama protest movement in B reports filed with the Colombo Fort and Kaduvela Magistrates Courts calling for their arrest for alleged unruly behavior during some of the public protests on the 9th of June. In a media communique, the police revealed that the Colombo Fort magistrate has already issued arrest orders for them, while the case filed in the Kaduwela Magistrates Court is to be taken up on the 5th of July.
The police have named a total of 9 prominent Gota Gogam activists as suspects in several cases filed in the courts for alleged unruly behavior during recent public protests. Accordingly, the police media division says that an order has been issued by the Fort Magistrates Court to arrest the suspects involved in the June 9 protest held in Fort and produce them in court. Among the protesters named are IUSF convener Vasanta Mudalige, artist Ratindu Senaratne, Jagat Manuvarna and Jihan Apuhami. According to the police media release on the subject, the individuals named allegedly engaged in unruly behavior during protests in the Colombo Fort police area, outside the police headquarters, in the Palavat area in Thalangama, and in front of Isurpaya, where they also alleged that damage was caused to public and private property. The individuals have been named by the police in their B reports filed at the Colombo Fort and Kaduwela Magistrates Court. Accordingly, the police are seeking to prosecute the individuals under the penal code for participating in an illegal gathering, obstructing police personnel from carrying out their duties, causing injuries and criminal coercion, among others. The police release says that while the Fort magistrate has already issued arrest orders for the suspects, the case filed in the Kaduwela Magistrate Court is to be taken up on the 5th of July.
Meanwhile, a generator at the Nolochale coal power plant was shut down last night for essential maintenance, the Ceylon Electricity Board has announced. Accordingly, Unit 2 will be out of operation for at least 75 days. As a result, the CB says that electricity supplied by the coal power plant to the national grid is expected to drop from 45% to 30% as a result of the shutdown. In order to balance out the generation capacity as a result, power generation activities at hydro and thermal power plants will have to be increased due to this situation. At present, fears are growing on the possibility of power cuts being extended in the coming weeks due to the sudden maintenance work. Pakistan's High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Major General Umar Farooq Burki, has assured that his government will extend its fullest support to the Sri Lankan government in overcoming the current economic crisis. High Commissioner Burki communicated this when he met President Gotabaya Rajapaksa at the President's house in Colombo yesterday. At the meeting, the High Commissioner stated that the close multilateral relations between the two countries, as well as the political, trade, cultural, security and development cooperation, will be further strengthened as well. President Rajapaksa thanked the government of Pakistan for awarding scholarships for higher education to Sri Lankan students, as well as sending the provision of selected medicinal drugs as humanitarian aid to Sri Lanka. The President also briefed the High Commissioner on Sri Lanka's current economic crisis. The High Commissioner further said that the government of Pakistan would provide assistance to overcome the current situation, and he anticipates that Sri Lanka would return to normalcy soon. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Education recommended the Committee on Public Accounts to take steps to reallocate funds from UNICEF, the ADB and the World Bank to help the ministry in its shortage of funds. The ministry also told the committee that the education sector is in dire straits at the moment due to the ongoing economic crisis, more so than during the pandemic.
During a recent meeting of the Committee on Public Accounts, Secretary to the Ministry of Education M.N. Ranasinghe informed the committee that the education sector was in dire straits at the moment due to the economic crisis. He made these remarks while addressing a special meeting on the COPA to examine the future educational plans to be implemented and measures taken to overcome the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic and the prevailing economic crisis on the education system of Sri Lanka. The Ministerial Secretary pointed out that the inability to cover the curriculum in the limited time available is due to the inability to hold classes on scheduled days, the existing fuel shortage, and the economic hardships of the students' families. The officials said that the implementation of online teaching in the long-term learning process is not a successful method for the students. They went on to say that the ministry is faced with inadequate funds as well and requested for action to be taken to repurpose the funds of projects such as UNICEF, ADB, World Bank, which are to be received from other institutions other than the government sources, and to implement priority programs. In the meantime, during another meeting that focused on developing solutions to the country's food crisis, the committee recommended that all ministers should unite and set up a cabinet subcommittee on food security to address the food crisis in the country. The members of the committee pointed out that it is important to set up this committee to bring all the agencies responsible for tackling the current food crisis together. Discussions also focused on obtaining support of the SAARC Food Bank and the World Food Programme for Sri Lanka in overcoming the food crisis. COPA chairman Professor Derana directed officials to look into the possibility of supplying food items at reasonable prices with the intervention of the government, as the food items available in the market are expensive. Accordingly, the possibility of catering to low-income families through the Food Commissioners Department, Lanka Satusa, State Trading Corporation and multi-purpose cooperative societies was also discussed.
Now, US stocks closed with a modest bounce yesterday but still suffered the biggest weekly percentage decline in months as investors wrestled with the growing likelihood of a recession as global central banks tried to stamp out inflation. Stubbornly, inflation has unnerved investors this year as the US Federal Reserve and most major central banks have begun to pivot from easy monetary policies to tightening measures which will slow the economy, possibly causing a recession and potentially dent corporate earnings. Each of the three major Wall Street indices fell for the third week in a row. The benchmark S&P 500 index suffered its biggest weekly percentage drop since January. The S&P 500 gained 7.68 points or 0.21% to end at 3,674.45 points, while the Nasdaq Composite gained 152.25 points or 1.43% to 10,798 points. Meanwhile, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 38.29 points or 0.13% to 29,888.78 points. Meanwhile, oil prices tumbled about 6% to a 4-week low yesterday on worries that the interest rate hikes by major central banks could slow the global economy and cut demand for energy.
Brent crude futures were down 45 cents or 0.4% to $118.06 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell 44 cents to $114.87.
Stubbornly high inflation has unnerved investors. Brent futures fell by $6 to 69 cents to settle at $113.12 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate crude fell $8 to settle at $109.56. That was the lowest close for Brent since the 20th of May and the lowest for WTI since the 12th of May. It was also the biggest daily percentage decline for Brent since early May and the biggest for WTI since late March. For the week, Brent futures declined for the first time in 5 weeks, while WTI dropped for the first time in 8 weeks. Global central bankers who quickly loosened monetary policy during the pandemic to avoid a recession are now tightening to fight inflation. The Federal Reserve this week hiked US rates by the most in more than a quarter of a century. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.